The alarm shrieked across the alien warship before I even finished my morning tea. Red lights flashed over the obsidian floor of the War Council chamber, and the deep horn of the Velksari fleet bellowed through the steel walls like a wounded beast. I set my cup down slowly. The warriors around me did not. They jumped up, drew their long crystal blades, and shouted orders in their harsh tongue. And then, as always, they looked at me and laughed. My name is Marcus Kane. I am the only human on this ship, and for the past 6 months I have been the favorite joke of every soldier on board. General Heron Thraxus, a towering creature with skin like polished black glass, marched past me and snorted. His eyes, bright red and slit like a cat's, glanced down at my plain gray uniform. "Still here, pet? I thought the shaking floor might have scared you off." The officers near him chuckled. One of them, a young lieutenant named Vessa, bumped her shoulder into mine on purpose as she passed. "Careful, little human. If you fall, I'm not picking you up." I said nothing. I never said anything. I only smiled a small, patient smile and tucked my leather journal under my arm. I had learned long ago that the loudest warriors are rarely the strongest ones. And I had also learned that silence, when used correctly, is a sharper blade than steel. The Velksari Imperium had made first contact with Earth 3 years ago. They had arrived expecting to find another weak race, perhaps useful as workers, perhaps useful as nothing. Instead, Earth had surprised them. We had not begged. We had not trembled. We had simply offered a trade agreement, a few cultural exchanges, and one single military liaison to be stationed aboard their flagship, the Crimson Dominion. That liaison was me. A quiet man in a plain uniform with no visible rank, no medals, no stripes, no stars. To the Velksari, I looked like a servant who had wandered into the wrong room. That was exactly what Earth had wanted them to think. I followed the officers into the main war room. The ceiling rose high above us, carved with the names of Velksari battles going back 10,000 years. Floating maps of stars hung in the air, glowing blue and gold. At the center of the room stood Commander Thraxus, barking orders at his staff. The fleet had detected movement near the Korathi asteroid belt, an old mining region on the edge of the Imperium's border. Something was hiding out there, something that should not be. "It's nothing," Thraxus growled. "Scout ships, smugglers, pirates, we will crush them within the hour." He slammed his fist on the table. The younger officers cheered. I quietly studied the map. The movement pattern was wrong for pirates. The ships were too spread out, too slow, too patient. Pirates attacked fast and ran faster. This was something else, something that wanted to be mistaken for pirates. I opened my journal and began sketching the pattern, my pencil moving in small, careful lines. Vessa noticed. She leaned over my shoulder with a smirk. "Drawing pretty pictures, Pet Kane. Maybe you can give it to the Empress as a gift." A few officers laughed. I did not look up. I simply turned my journal slightly so she could see the sketch. Her smirk faltered for half a second, just half. Then she rolled her eyes and walked away. But I saw the moment her eyes had changed. I saw her wonder, just for a heartbeat, if the pet was perhaps not quite the pet she thought. That was enough. That was always enough. The war room buzzed with activity. Thraxus ordered the fleet to full attack formation and launched 3 scout ships toward the belt. I walked quietly to the observation window and watched the stars. The Crimson Dominion was a beautiful ship, I had to admit. Long, sharp, carved from a single piece of red crystal that glowed softly in the dark of space. Around it floated 70 smaller warships, all bristling with weapons. It was the most powerful fleet the Velksari had. And it was about to walk straight into a trap. I knew it was a trap because I had seen this exact pattern before, many years ago, in a war that no one on this ship had ever heard of. Behind me, an old voice spoke softly. "You see something they do not." I turned. An elderly Velksari stood there, his black skin faded to a dusty gray with age. His name was Keth, and he was the ship's archivist, the keeper of old records and forgotten stories. He was the only one on the ship who had never laughed at me. He had only watched me, always watched me, with careful, curious eyes. "I see nothing, honored archivist," I said politely. Keth smiled, showing rows of small white teeth. "Your hands say otherwise, human. You draw with the confidence of a man who has drawn such things before, and your eyes do not move like the eyes of a junior officer. They move like the eyes of someone who has already decided what will happen next. He paused. Tell me, Marcus Kane, who are you really? I looked at him for a long moment, then I smiled my small, patient smile. I am a liaison, nothing more. Keth nodded slowly, as you say, but he did not walk away. He stayed beside me watching the stars. I have read every record in our archives, every war, every peace, every hero and every villain, and sometimes human I read of a pattern that repeats itself. A quiet man, a plain uniform, and behind that quiet man the fall of empires that underestimated him. He turned his ancient red eyes toward me. I wonder which you are. Before I could answer, the ship rocked violently, the lights flickered, sirens screamed. Thraxis roared from across the room, "Report, what was that?" A young officer stammered, "Sir, the scout ships are gone, all three of them. They did not even send a warning signal." The war room fell silent. Every Velksari on the bridge turned pale, which for their species meant their black skin shifted to a dull gray. Scout ships did not vanish without warning, not unless they were destroyed in a single instant by something far more powerful than they were. Thraxis bared his sharp teeth. "Impossible, open fire on the belt, full spread, now." I stepped forward just a single step. "Commander." He whirled around, eyes burning. "What did you say, human?" "I would advise against firing," I said calmly. "You do not know what is out there. Firing blindly into the belt will reveal your position. It will tell them exactly where you are and how many of you there are." Thraxis laughed loud and cruel. "You advise me, you, a soft little human in a paper uniform." He stepped toward me, towering over my head by nearly 3 feet. "I have fought in 100 battles, pet. I have killed enemies older than your whole species, and you wish to teach me war." I held his gaze. I did not blink. I did not move. "I wish to keep your ship from being destroyed, Commander, that is all." For a moment the war room was dead silent. Every officer watched. Vesa, near the back, stopped smiling. Keth leaned slightly forward, as if waiting to see what I would do next. Thraxis finally turned away and spit on the floor near my boots. "Fire all weapons, full spread into the belt. Show these cowards the fury of the Imperium." The ship's great cannons roared. Beams of blue light tore through space and slammed into the asteroids. Rocks shattered. Dust clouds bloomed. And then from behind those dust clouds, something enormous began to move. Not 3 scout ships, not a dozen, hundreds. Vesa gasped. Thraxis froze. The war room erupted into shouting. I quietly closed my journal, tucked my pencil behind my ear, and walked calmly to an empty console at the side of the room. I sat down. I placed my hands on the controls, and I began, very softly, to type. Keth watched me, and his old eyes widened, because the commands I was typing were commands no liaison should ever know. Behind me, Thraxis finally noticed. "What are you doing, human? Step away from that console. That is a command station." I did not turn. "Commander," I said gently, "in about 40 seconds your ship is going to die. Everyone on this bridge will die with it. You may continue shouting at me, or you may allow me to save your life. The choice is yours." Thraxis stared, his mouth opened. No sound came out. And far away, on a distant throne of crystal and fire, a message was being delivered to the Empress of the Velksari Imperium. A message with a single sentence, spoken in a language she had not heard in 40 years. "The Oathbound has moved." Her blood went cold. She rose from her throne, and she began to run. The Crimson Dominion shuddered like a living thing caught in a storm. Explosions bloomed across the main display as enemy warships poured out from behind the asteroid dust, their dark hulls shaped like curved knives. I had seen those hulls before, long ago, in a nightmare I had hoped never to revisit. The ZH Collective, a hive mind species that moved as one, thought as one, and attacked as one. They had been pushing against the Velksari border for 3 years, quietly eating away at small colonies and scout posts. The Velksari generals had always dismissed them as annoying insects, a problem for tomorrow. Tomorrow had arrived. On the bridge, chaos reigned. Officers shouted into their communication links. Sparks rained from a shattered ceiling panel. One of the navigation officers was slumped over his station, knocked out by a falling beam. Thraxis roared orders that no one could hear over the screaming alarms. The great flagship tilted hard to one side as another impact shook its crystal frame. I kept typing. My fingers moved across the console with the speed of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. To a Velksari eye, it looked impossible. To me, it was simply muscle memory. 40 years of war do not leave a man easily. "Pet Kane," Vesa shouted across the room, her voice shaking. "What are you doing at that station?" "Saving your life, Lieutenant," I replied without looking up. "Hold on to something. This is going to be rough." I pressed the final command. The Crimson Dominion's engines roared. The ship tilted sharply downward, diving beneath the ZH-roll formation. Officers grabbed consoles to stay upright. Thraxis stumbled but caught himself on the command table, his red eyes wide with confusion. "What are you doing?" he roared. "You are exposing our underside to them." "Yes," I said calmly, "I am." The ZH-roll ships took the bait. They rotated their weapons downward, hungry to strike the weakest part of the flagship. And as they did, their own formation opened up in the middle, just for a moment. Just for the tiny heartbeat I needed. I pressed another key. The Crimson Dominion's rear engines flared. The ship spun around on its own axis with a grace that no one on the bridge had ever seen before, and its main cannons, now aimed directly at the gap in the enemy formation, opened fire. The result was beautiful and terrible. 3 enemy warships exploded in a single line. A fourth was torn in half. The entire ZH-roll formation broke apart as the hive mind tried to compensate for the sudden loss. Their coordination faltered. Their shape shifted. And as they shifted, I fired again, and then again, always into the gaps, always into the weak points. I did not aim for the strongest ships. I aimed for the ones that held the formation together. The ones whose loss would cause the most confusion. In 90 seconds, the ZH-roll attack fleet was broken. What had been a trap for the Crimson Dominion had become a graveyard for its enemies. The last few ZH-roll ships turned and fled back into the asteroid belt, leaving behind the wreckage of their sisters. The bridge was completely, utterly silent. Every Velksari officer stared at me, not with mockery, not with laughter, with something much deeper, something closer to fear. Thraxis slowly stood up straight. He looked at the main display, then at the smoking enemy wreckage floating in space, then back at me. His mouth worked, but no words came out. He tried again. What maneuver was that? I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I opened them and looked at him steadily. "An old one, Commander, older than you." Keth the Archivist stepped forward. His old hands were trembling, but his voice was firm. "That was the Shattered Mirror," he whispered. "The maneuver written of only in the oldest records, the technique of the Oath-bound. It has not been performed in 40 years. He turned to stare at me, his red eyes filled with something close to awe. "Human, how do you know the Shattered Mirror?" I did not answer. I simply stood up from the console, brushed off my plain gray uniform, and walked back to my seat at the edge of the room. I picked up my cup of tea. It had gone cold. I drank it anyway. Vesa, still standing where she had been, slowly lowered her weapon. Her face had changed. The mockery was gone. In its place was confusion, and under the confusion, the first seeds of something like respect. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. Not loud enough for the others to hear, just for me. "Who are you really, Marcus Kane?" I looked at her and smiled my small, patient smile. "I am a liaison, Lieutenant, nothing more." She did not believe me. I could see it in her eyes. Thraxis, still shaken, tried to reassert his authority. He straightened his shoulders and barked orders at the crew to begin repairs and to send scouts to confirm the enemy had fully retreated. Officers jumped to obey, grateful for something familiar. But as they moved, I noticed something I had not noticed before. They no longer laughed when they passed me. They no longer bumped my shoulder. A few of them even gave me small, careful nods. Word travels fast on a warship, especially word of a miracle. I spent the next several hours in the medical bay. Not because I was injured, but because the wounded needed visiting. A good commander, I had learned long ago, walks among the hurt and thanks them personally. Even if he is not supposed to be a commander. Even if he is supposed to be just a liaison in a plain gray uniform. I walked from bed to bed, speaking softly to young soldiers with burns and cuts, listening to their stories, remembering their names. Most were too shocked to speak to me properly. A human here in their medical bay. A human who had just saved their lives. One young soldier, barely out of training, grabbed my hand as I passed. "Sir," he whispered, "they say you commanded the ship. They say you fired the cannons. Is it true?" I squeezed his hand gently. "I only helped, son. Your ship saved itself. You saved yourselves." He shook his head. "No, sir, I was on the gunnery deck. I felt the ship move. I have served 5 years on this vessel. No Velksari has ever moved her like that. Only someone who loved her could move her like that." I said nothing for a moment. Then I patted his hand and moved on. Keth was waiting for me outside the medical bay. The old archivist fell into step beside me as I walked the quiet corridor. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The soft hum of the ship's engines filled the silence between us. Finally, Keth said, "There is a room in the deepest archive. A room only I may enter. In that room there is a painting, very old, of a battle fought 40 years ago. In that battle, a small group of warriors from 3 different species stood together against something the galaxy has since forgotten. They won, but only barely, and they were led, all of them, by a single commander. A commander whose face was never shown in any official record because his rank was classified above all others." He stopped walking, I stopped too. "In that painting," Keth continued softly, "the commander wears a plain gray uniform. No medals, no stripes, no stars." He turned to face me. His face was left blank. Every artist who tried to paint it was ordered to leave it blank. I have stared at that painting for 30 years, wondering whose face belonged there. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Now I know." I met his gaze. I did not confirm. I did not deny. I simply said, "The Empress will be coming, will she not?" Keth nodded slowly. "She was notified the moment the shattered mirror was performed. There are only 3 beings alive who know that maneuver, and 2 of them are dead. She will come. She will come quickly. And when she arrives, this ship will never be the same." I nodded. Then I should prepare my tea set. She always liked the green one. Keth stared at me. Then slowly, a small smile crossed his ancient face. It was the smile of a man who had finally solved a puzzle he had been studying for 3 decades. "As you say, strategos," he whispered. I did not correct him. I simply walked on. Back in my small quarters, I sat down at my desk and opened my leather journal. I flipped past the sketches of stars, past the notes of observation, past the quiet records of every insult I had endured over 6 long months. I turned to a blank page and began to write. Not tactics this time, not observations. A letter I had promised myself I would write if this day ever came. "Dear old friend," I wrote, "the shadows have returned. I will need you soon. Please forgive me for breaking our last promise. I know I said I was done. I lied." I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside a small wooden box on my desk. Then I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for just a moment. 40 years is a long time to carry a secret, and the secret I carried was about to crack open, whether I wished it or not. Outside my quarters, the news was already spreading through the Velksari crew. A whisper here, a rumor there. The human had saved them. The human had used a maneuver from legend. The human was perhaps not a human at all, but something far stranger. By the next morning, every single soldier on the Crimson Dominion knew about the shattered mirror, and every single one of them looked at me differently when I passed. Vesa found me in the morning on the observation deck. I was watching the stars, drinking my tea, as I always did. She stood beside me for a long moment before speaking. "I am sorry," she finally said, "for the way I spoke to you, for all of it." I looked at her. She was young, perhaps only 100 years old by Velksari reckoning, which was quite young for her species. Her eyes were tired. Her uniform was stained from the fighting. She was, I realized, genuinely ashamed. "Lieutenant Vesa," I said gently, "do you know why I never corrected you?" She shook her head. "Because a soldier who needs to be treated with respect before she has earned her respect is not a soldier worth having. You were rude to me, yes, but you were also brave, smart, and quick in combat. Those things matter more. Your rudeness cost me nothing. Your bravery saved lives." I smiled at her. "I forgive you, and I am proud to serve alongside you." Her eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. She saluted me, not in the Velksari way, but in a clumsy imitation of the human way she must have seen in some record. It was crooked and wrong. It was beautiful. I returned the salute properly. Behind us, the great doors of the observation deck hissed open. An officer rushed in, breathless. "Commander Thraxis requests all senior staff in the main hall immediately. An Imperial ship has just arrived in the system. It is the Flame of Dawn, Her Majesty's personal vessel." My cup of tea paused halfway to my lips. The Empress had arrived. The Flame of Dawn appeared out of a golden tear in space, so large and so bright that it seemed to fill half the viewing window. It was not shaped like the other Velksari warships. It was rounder, softer, carved from white crystal veined with red fire, and it glowed as if a piece of a sun had been captured inside its walls. Every officer on the Crimson Dominion stared in stunned silence as the Imperial ship took position beside them. Commander Thraxis stood on the main hall balcony, barking orders for a formal reception. Soldiers rushed to change into their dress uniforms. The floors were polished. The flags were raised. The long crystal hallway that led to the main reception chamber was lined with the sharpest, tallest warriors on the ship, each of them standing at perfect attention. In the middle of all this rushing and shouting, I quietly walked back to my quarters. I did not put on a different uniform. I did not comb my hair in any new way. I simply washed my face, adjusted the collar of my plain gray uniform, picked up my leather journal, and walked slowly toward the reception chamber. On the way, I passed Thraxis himself. He stopped me in the corridor. His face was tense, and his red eyes were sharp with worry. "Human," he said in a low voice, "you will remain in your quarters during the Empress's visit. You will not be seen. You will not be heard. Do you understand me?" I looked up at him. "No, Commander, I will be in the reception chamber, as is proper." His face darkened. "I gave you an order." "And I have declined it," I said simply, respectfully. He stepped closer, his enormous shadow falling over me. "You forget your place, pet. I will have you dragged back to your room if I must." I did not step back. I did not move at all. "Commander," I said, and my voice was as quiet and calm as ever, "I strongly suggest you not place your hands on me today. Not today of all days. You will regret it." Something in my voice made him pause. He stared at me for a long moment. Then slowly he stepped back, his mouth twisted. "On your own head be it," he growled, and he stalked away. I continued walking. The reception chamber was enormous. Its ceiling rose at least 50 feet above the floor, and its walls were carved with the great battles of the Velksari Imperium. In the center of the room, a long red carpet had been unrolled. On either side of the carpet stood hundreds of soldiers, officers, and high-ranking staff, all wearing their finest uniforms. At the far end of the carpet, Thraxis stood waiting, with his top commanders beside him. Vesa was among them. She had cleaned herself up and stood in her dress uniform, her face unreadable. I walked quietly into the chamber and took a position near the back, behind the other officers. No one stopped me. A few heads turned, eyes widened, but no one spoke. Keth appeared beside me. "A wise choice, old friend. The back is always the best place to see the room." I smiled slightly. Great trumpets sounded. The enormous doors at the other end of the chamber slid open with a deep hum, and she walked in. Empress Zalvareth Zir was taller than any Velksari I had ever seen, nearly 8 feet at the shoulder. Her skin was the deepest black, but it shimmered with veins of gold that pulsed with her heartbeat. She wore a flowing gown of red and white, and her long silver hair fell down her back like a river of starlight. On her head rested a crown of crystal and fire. Her eyes were the most striking part of her. They were not merely red. They were burning red, the red of a star at the moment of its birth. To look into them was to feel very small and very seen. Behind her walked 12 honor guards, each of them a giant even by Velksari standards. They carried long staves tipped with golden flame. They moved as one. The entire chamber dropped to one knee. Hundreds of Velksari bowed their heads at the same moment. The sound of it was like a single, soft breath. Only 3 people remained standing. Keth, who as archivist was exempt from bowing, the Empress herself, and me. I had not knelt. I had not bowed. I stood quietly in the back, my hands folded in front of me, watching. The Empress began to walk down the red carpet. She moved slowly, with grace, greeting each officer by name as she passed. She stopped at Thraxus, and the great commander lowered his head even further. "My Empress," he said, his voice thick with pride and fear, "the Crimson Dominion is honored beyond words by your visit." She placed one long, elegant hand on his shoulder. "Rise, General, you have served well. Your crew survived an ambush that should have ended you. Tell me, how did this miracle happen?" Thraxus hesitated. His eyes flickered just for a moment toward the back of the room, toward me. The Empress noticed. Her burning eyes followed his gaze. She turned her head slowly, and she looked directly at me. Time stopped. I did not move. I did not look away. I simply met her gaze, calm and steady, as I had met the gazes of 1,000 commanders before her. Her burning red eyes widened. Then they grew very bright. Then they filled with something no one in that chamber had ever seen before in the face of their Empress. They filled with tears. She took one step forward, then another. She did not speak. She walked slowly all the way down the long red carpet, past rows of kneeling officers who dared not lift their heads to look. She walked past her generals. She walked past Thraxus, who stared at her in confusion. She walked until she stood before me. She was so much taller than I was. I had to tilt my head back to meet her eyes. And then the Empress of the Velksari Imperium, ruler of 400 worlds, commander of 10 million warriors, lowered her head. She bent her neck until her forehead was nearly level with mine. It was a gesture I knew. It was the gesture of a student greeting her teacher. It was a gesture no Velksari had shown to an outsider in 4,000 years. The chamber erupted in gasps. Officers who had been kneeling lifted their heads to stare in disbelief. Thraxus let out a strangled sound. Vesa clasped her hand over her mouth. The Empress spoke, and her voice was soft, almost a whisper. But the chamber was so silent that every word carried. "Ikulthun Vereth," she said in the oldest form of her language. "The oath-bound walks among us." Keth, in the back, fell to his knees and began to weep quietly. I looked up at her. For the first time in 40 years, I allowed myself a small, real smile. Not the careful, patient smile I wore for strangers. A true smile. The smile of a man greeting an old friend he had not seen in a very long time. "Hello, Zal," I said quietly in the same ancient tongue. "You have grown." A soft laugh escaped her lips, mixed with a sob. "And you have not aged a day, teacher. How is that possible?" "Clean living, mostly." She laughed again, this time more freely. Then her face grew serious and she straightened up. She turned to face the chamber. When she spoke now, her voice filled every corner of the room. "Listen to me, my children, my generals, my officers. Listen carefully, for I will speak only once. The man standing behind me is not a liaison. The man standing behind me is not a human soldier. The man standing behind me is the reason you are alive today. The reason I am alive today. The reason our Imperium still stands at all." Thraxus's mouth fell open. 40 years ago," the Empress continued, "when I was a young princess, there was a war. A war so terrible that all records of it were sealed beneath the deepest vault of the imperial palace. A war against an enemy so old that even our most ancient scrolls only whisper its name. My father's fleet was destroyed. My mother died in my arms. I was 15 years old, and I was about to be taken by the enemy and turned into something I cannot speak of." Her voice shook. She paused, gathered herself, and went on. "On that day, a small ship arrived, human, only one ship. It carried a handful of warriors and one quiet commander in a plain gray uniform. That commander looked at my weeping, broken form and he said 5 words to me. He said, "Get up, little one, fight." And then he led a coalition of 3 species, humans, Draxon, and the last of the old Korathi, against an enemy that none of us could have defeated alone. We won. Barely. Many died, but I lived. My throne lived. My Imperium lived, because of him. She turned back to me, and once again her burning eyes filled with tears. His name is Marcus Kane. His rank is Strategos Primarch, the highest classified military rank ever created by the human species, a rank held by only one living being at a time, a rank above all generals, above all admirals, above all public command structures. He was placed on this ship 6 months ago as a silent guardian to watch over us in case the old shadows returned. She paused. Yesterday, those shadows returned, and once again he saved us. The chamber was so silent you could have heard a feather land. Thraxus was pale. His great shoulders had slumped. Vesa was frozen in place, her eyes huge. The Empress turned to face the room. "You will kneel to this man. You will serve him. You will obey him. Because whether he wears a uniform or not, whether he says so or not, he is the senior commander on this ship. He has always been, from the moment he stepped aboard." She turned to me. "Teacher, forgive me. I should have come sooner." I shook my head gently. "You came exactly when you were needed, Zhao. That is all any of us can do." Then, to the gasping astonishment of every soul in the chamber, the Empress took 3 steps back from me, raised her right hand to her chest, and bowed formally, the ancient warrior's bow, the deepest honor her species could give. The 12 honor guards behind her followed at once, dropping to one knee, their heads lowered. And then slowly, like a wave moving across a still lake, the rest of the chamber began to kneel. Officers, soldiers, dignitaries, even Thraxus himself, trembling with shame and shock, finally lowered his massive body to one knee. I stood in the back of the chamber, in my plain gray uniform, with my leather journal under my arm, and I looked at every face in the room. And I understood, for the first time in 6 months, that the hiding was finally over. I walked forward. I walked down the long red carpet past hundreds of kneeling warriors. I walked until I stood beside the Empress, the girl I had once told to get up and fight. The girl who had grown into an Empress. The girl who was now a grown woman, taller than me, more powerful than me, and still, somehow, looking at me as if I were the bravest thing she had ever known. "Rise, all of you," I said quietly. My voice was not loud, but it carried. "The time for kneeling is over. The time for working has begun." They rose. The Empress turned to me. "Teacher, we must speak, privately. There is much you do not yet know, and much that has been waiting for your return." I nodded, "Then let us speak." Together we walked out of the chamber. Behind us, 1,000 eyes followed every step, and in the silence they left behind, a single truth began to settle over the entire crew of the Crimson Dominion. The quiet human they had mocked for 6 months was not a human at all, in any way that mattered. He was something older, something stranger, something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And the galaxy was about to remember his name. The private chamber the Empress chose for our meeting was small and simple, which surprised the honor guards who had tried to lead us to her grand receiving hall. She had waved them off. "No gold," she had said. "No crystal, no throne. I speak with my teacher tonight, not with a subject." And so they had brought us to a plain study with wooden walls, a small fire in the corner, 2 chairs, and a low table between them. She sat down slowly, her flowing gown folding around her like a sea of red silk. She looked tired, not the tired of a sleepless night, but the tired of 40 years of ruling alone. I sat across from her and placed my journal on my lap. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled softly. She stared into the flames, and I watched her, seeing both the Empress and the frightened girl I remembered, existing at once in the same body. "You should not have hidden from me," she finally said. Her voice was not angry, it was sad. "I did not hide," I replied gently. "I waited. There is a difference." "For what? For what did you wait?" "For the moment you needed me." I leaned forward slightly. Zal, if I had come to you 40 years ago as the Strategos Primarch, as your teacher, as your ally of war, your generals would have fought me for your attention. Your court would have tried to bend me to their politics. Your Imperium would have treated my return as a sign that the old war was back, and they would have panicked and they would have made mistakes. So I stayed quiet. I watched from Earth. I waited. And when the signs of the shadows returned, I came aboard this ship as a nobody, so that when I was finally needed, no one could deny what was happening. She nodded slowly. You were always a patient teacher. I had to be. You were a very stubborn student. She laughed. It was a real laugh, the laugh of a young woman, not an empress. Then she sobered. Her burning eyes met mine, and the weight of the galaxy returned to her shoulders. The HFY are not what they appear to be, teacher. They are not a hive. Not in the way we thought. They are being used. Something old is inside them, something that wears them like clothing. I was silent for a long moment. The devourers beyond. She flinched at the name. It had been forbidden to speak it for 40 years. Yes. I closed my eyes. I had feared this from the moment I had seen the attack pattern at Korathi. The devourers had always been patient. They did not rush. They did not strike openly. They crept into weaker species, hollowed them out, used them as puppets to test the strength of stronger civilizations. The HFY had been their puppet for perhaps 20 years now, maybe longer. The Velksari had been fighting a shadow, not an enemy. No wonder they had been losing. How many star systems? I asked. 17 lost, 23 more under siege. Our border is collapsing, teacher. The HFY, or rather what drives them, are pushing us back, and our war strategies do not work against them. Every trap we set, they see coming. Every maneuver we try, they counter. It is as if they can read our minds. They can, I said quietly. The devourers share a collective consciousness with anything they infect. When your generals plan a maneuver, they are planning it into the ears of their enemy. That is why you are losing. Her eyes widened. Then how do we win? We lie to ourselves. She tilted her head. I do not understand. I leaned back in my chair. We plan openly, knowing the enemy will hear. We give them false plans. And in the deepest secret, in words spoken to no one, in orders passed only through runners who do not know what they carry, we plan the real attack. It is slower. It is harder. But it is the only way to surprise an enemy who lives inside your ears. She stared at me for a long moment, then she nodded. You will teach my generals. Some of them. All of them. I shook my head. No, only the ones I choose. Some of your generals are too proud, too loud, and too used to being obeyed. They will leak information without meaning to. I will pick my team carefully, Zal. You must trust me. I have always trusted you. I smiled, I know. She reached across the low table and took my hand. Her fingers were so much longer than mine and warmer, as Velksari's skin always was. Teacher, there is one more thing. Tell me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The devourers have marked someone in the imperial court. I can feel them probing at my mind when I sleep. They are searching for something. I do not know what, but I wake in the night with strange thoughts that are not mine. And I fear that one of my closest advisors is already compromised. My blood went cold. Who has access to your sleeping quarters? Only 3, my High Chancellor, my Chief of Intelligence, and my Lord of Ships. She paused. One of them is no longer themselves. I was silent for a very long time. I looked into the fire, thinking through old patterns, old lessons, old wars. Finally, I said, then we must find out which. And we must do so without the devourer knowing we are looking. How? Leave that to me. She nodded. Then she pulled a small silver box from within her robe and placed it on the table between us. She slid it toward me. I have been keeping this for you. It was taken from you the day the war ended. I was too young then to return it, and when I grew old enough, you had vanished. I opened the box. Inside, resting on a cushion of black velvet, was a single golden medal shaped like a star with 7 points. The surface was old and scratched. The ribbon was faded, but it was still the most beautiful thing I had seen in 40 years. The mark of the Oathbound. It was not a human medal. It was not a Velksari medal. It was the seal of the ancient alliance that had defeated the Devourers the first time, given only to the commander who had led the final battle. It was, in many ways, the highest honor any soldier in the galaxy could ever hold, and I had worn it only once for a single day before hiding it away and hoping it would never be needed again. "Zal," I said quietly, "I cannot accept this. Not yet." "Why?" "Because the moment I wear it, every being in the galaxy who remembers the old war will know that the old war has returned. There will be panic. There will be questions. There will be politics. I will wear it on the day we win, not before." She nodded slowly. "As you wish, teacher." She closed the box and slid it back into her robe. We sat in silence for a while longer, watching the fire. Outside, somewhere in the corridors of the Flame of Dawn, her honor guards waited patiently. Somewhere in the heart of the Imperium, a devourer spy was whispering into the Empress's own dreams. And somewhere, far beyond the border, the shadows were gathering for a war that had been 40 years in the making. Finally, I stood up. "I will need a team, Zal. I will need people I can trust absolutely. I would like to start with two." "Name them." "Lieutenant Vessa from the Crimson Dominion, and Keth, your archivist." She blinked. "Vessa, the young officer, why her?" "Because she spent 6 months mocking me, and yesterday she apologized to me without being asked. That is character. That is rare. I want her at my side." The Empress smiled. "And Keth, I understand. He has waited longer for your return than anyone. Granted, take them." "Thank you." I walked toward the door. As I reached it, she spoke one more time. "Teacher." I turned. "Thank you for coming back, for not leaving me to face this alone." I looked at her for a long moment, the girl I had saved, the woman she had become, and something in my chest tightened in a way it had not in many years. "Zal," I said softly, "I never left you, not truly. A teacher never leaves his student. He only steps away so she can learn to walk." She pressed her hand to her heart. I walked out. The corridor outside was long and quiet, lit by soft golden lights. The honor guards watched me pass with careful, respectful eyes. News had clearly spread through the Imperial ship. I walked past them, back toward the docking corridor that would return me to the Crimson Dominion. As I walked, I opened my journal and began writing, my pencil moving quickly. A list of names, a list of plans, a list of lies I would need to tell, and a much shorter list of truths I would need to protect. When I reached the docking corridor, someone was waiting for me. It was Thraxus. The great general stood alone, his massive shoulders slumped. His dress uniform was still crisp, but his eyes were hollow. He had been waiting for a while. When he saw me approach, he straightened up with visible effort. "Strategos," he said. His voice was rough. He had never called me that before. "May I speak with you?" I stopped and looked up at him. "Yes, General." He swallowed. He was clearly struggling with something. Finally, he said, "I called you a pet. I mocked you. I let my officers mock you. I would have left you to die in the corridor 6 months ago if I had been given the chance." He paused. "I expect to be removed from command. I accept this. I only ask that my crew not suffer for my pride." I studied him for a long time. He stood there, waiting for his punishment, his massive form trembling just slightly. He had been a proud warrior all his life. To ask for mercy for his crew and not for himself took more courage than he probably realized. "General Thraxus," I said, "look at me." He raised his eyes. "You commanded well in the ambush. You held the crew together when the bridge fell into chaos. You survived. Your ship survived. Most commanders would not have. Your pride was a flaw, yes, but your courage was not. I have no wish to remove you from command. I wish to work with you." He blinked, his mouth opened slightly. "But sir, Every soldier fails, General. The measure of a warrior is not whether he falls, but whether he rises different. You will rise different." For a long moment, he could not speak. Then, slowly, he lowered his great head to me in the warrior's bow. "I will serve you, Strategos, to my last breath." "I know you will." I placed a hand on his massive forearm. "Now walk with me. We have a war to plan, and I need you to be the loudest, proudest, most arrogant general you can possibly be in every public meeting from now on." He looked confused. "Sir, the enemy is listening, General, and I need them to hear exactly what I want them to hear. Your pride, it turns out, is about to become our greatest weapon." A slow, sharp smile spread across Thraxus's face. It was the first real smile I had seen from him. "As you command, strategos." We walked together down the corridor, back toward the Crimson Dominion, back toward the work that waited for us. Behind us, the flame of dawn glowed in the dark. Ahead of us, a war was waiting. And for the first time in 40 years, I was ready to fight it. Over the next 2 weeks, the Crimson Dominion became the quiet heart of a much larger plan. I did not take an office. I did not take a title. I continued to wear my plain gray uniform, still without medals, still without rank insignia. But now, when I walked through the ship, every soldier saluted me. Officers moved aside as I passed. Thraxus himself walked at my side during formal inspections, his face proud and loud, as if I were his personal honored guest rather than his commander. This was, of course, the lie I had asked him to tell. In public, in every meeting broadcast on open channels, in every announcement sent across the fleet, the plan was this. The Velksari Imperium would launch a massive counterattack against the HFY through the Gorian Pass. Ships would be gathered. Soldiers would be moved. Great speeches would be given. Thraxus himself would lead the front lines. Everyone, from the lowest soldier to the highest court advisor, would hear about this plan. Which meant, of course, that the Devourers would hear about it too, through whatever puppet they had placed in the imperial court. In private, in rooms swept for listening devices 3 times a day, in conversations held only between myself, the Empress, Vesa, Keth, and one small hand-picked team of 6 others, the real plan was very different. The Gorian Pass was a trap, not for us, for them. I sat in my private planning room on the Crimson Dominion late one night, going over the final details. The table before me was covered with holographic maps and marked with small tokens representing fleet positions. Vesa sat across from me, her face tight with focus. She had become a remarkable tactical mind once I had pulled her out of her shell of arrogance. Keth sat beside her, adding old tactical patterns from his archives that no current general would remember. "The HFY will move when they see Thraxus enter the pass," Vesa said, tracing a line with her finger. "Their prediction pattern will say he is vulnerable, his flanks are exposed, his supply lines are thin. They will send their main fleet to crush him. And when they do," Keth added, "the real human fleet, hidden behind the third moon of Velanti, will emerge behind them." "Cutting off their retreat," Vesa finished. I nodded slowly. "And at that moment the Velksari Reserve Fleet will strike from the 4th quadrant. The HFY will be caught in 3 directions. They will break." Vesa frowned. "But the Devourers inside the HFY, will they not simply flee, abandon the bodies and move to new hosts?" "They will try," I said. "That is why we will not be targeting the HFY ships at all." She blinked. "Then what are we targeting?" I smiled slightly. I tapped a small, unremarkable point on the map. A single asteroid far behind the main HFY fleet, marked on no standard star chart. "This," I said, "the nest." Keth drew in a sharp breath. "You found it." "Earth scouts found it 2 months ago. The Devourers always need a physical anchor, a place where their central mind rests. Destroy that and every puppet they control becomes a corpse." I paused. "The battle at the Gorian Pass is the distraction. The real attack is a single ship, a small, quiet ship, carrying a small, quiet team. That ship will slip past the HFY during the battle and it will destroy the nest." Vesa stared at me. "Who will lead that ship?" I looked at her. "I will." She opened her mouth to protest. Keth held up a hand. "Of course he will," the old archivist said softly. "He is the oath-bound. This is what he does." I stood up. The plan was ready. The pieces were in place. Tomorrow, Thraxus would announce the attack on the Gorian Pass. Tomorrow, the trap would begin. And in 3 days, we would either save the galaxy or I would finally die, 40 years later, fighting the same enemy. It felt right somehow, a circle closing. I walked to the window of my planning room and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the shadows were waiting. Somewhere out there, an old enemy was stirring in its sleep. And somewhere, deep in my chest, the soldier I had tried to retire 40 years ago was stretching his muscles, preparing for one last fight. "All right, old friend," I whispered to the dark. "Let's finish what we started." The morning of the battle, I rose early and drank my tea alone. The ship around me was quiet, the quiet of 1,000 souls all holding their breath at the same time. Every officer knew that today was the day. Every soldier had said their goodbyes. Every engineer had checked their systems 3 times. And now, in the last hour before launch, the great Crimson Dominion floated in silent space, waiting. I folded my uniform neatly, as I had every morning for 6 months. I washed my face. I brushed my gray hair back. I picked up my leather journal and tucked it into my coat pocket. And then, for the first time in 40 years, I opened the small wooden box I had kept hidden in my quarters since the day I had first come aboard. Inside was a uniform. Not gray, not plain, not without rank. It was a deep midnight blue, simple in cut, but lined with fine silver trim at the collar and cuffs. On the left side of the chest was a single small badge, a 7-pointed golden star, the mark of the oath bound. I stood looking at it for a long moment, then I closed the box. Not today. Today I would fight in my plain gray uniform one more time. The medal would wait until the war was won, as I had promised the Empress. If we lost, no one would need to see it. If we won, I would put it on before I went home. I walked out of my quarters. The corridors were lined with soldiers. They did not speak. They only saluted as I passed. I returned every salute. I walked to the main hangar where my small strike ship, a modified scout vessel named the Silver Finch, was waiting. Beside it stood Vesa, Keth, and the 6 carefully chosen team members I had selected over the past 2 weeks. 3 humans, 3 Velksari, all of them young, all of them brilliant, all of them, I hoped, coming home. Thraxus stood at the end of the line. He was already in his command armor, a great war harness of black and red. His own ship, the flagship, was preparing for launch alongside 50 others. He would lead the main fleet into the Gorian Pass. He would be the bright, loud, beautiful distraction that drew every devourer eye in the galaxy. "Strategos," he said when I reached him. "General, they will write songs about this day." "They will write songs about you," I corrected gently. "Make them good ones." He laughed, a short, sharp laugh, and then clasped my shoulder with his massive hand. "I will see you on the other side." "You will." He turned and walked toward his ship. I watched him go. Then I turned to my team. "All right," I said, "let's go hunting." The Silver Finch was small and fast, sleek as a knife, built to slip through space unseen. We loaded in quickly. I took the command chair. Vesa took navigation. Keth took communications. The 6 team members took weapons, engineering, and tactical. We launched quietly, slipping out of the Crimson Dominion's hangar and vanishing into the dark while the main fleet was still making noise getting into formation. For 6 hours we ran silent. No communication, no signals. We moved through the spaces between systems, always in the shadows of larger objects, always drifting on minimum power when we could. Vesa was a remarkable pilot. She handled the Silver Finch like it was an extension of her own body. Then in the distance, we saw it. The Gorian Pass lit up with blue fire as Thraxus and his fleet engaged the HFY main force. The battle was enormous. Ships the size of cities traded blows. Entire formations moved like flocks of birds, twisting and striking and retreating. The HFY, exactly as predicted, committed their full strength to crushing Thraxus. Their ships poured out from every direction, leaving their rear lines thin. Which was exactly when we moved. The Silver Finch accelerated hard. Vesa pushed the engines to their limit. We shot through the gap left by the HFY main fleet, undetected in the chaos, heading straight for the unmarked asteroid that held the Devourer nest. "Contact in 10 minutes, Vesa called. "Any defenders?" I asked. Keth scanned the area. 3 HFY ships guarding the nest, Not their best. The Devourers did not expect us to know about this location. Arm forward weapons, plot an attack run. Vesa, you have the approach. Yes, sir. The attack was brutal and quick. The three ZHRL ships turned to face us, but they were too slow. Vesa swept the Silver Finch under their formation, and our forward cannons tore through their engines in a precise line. Two of them lost power. The third tried to ram us. Vesa spun the Silver Finch sideways, and the enemy ship shot past us and crashed into the asteroid instead, exploding in a silent bloom of light. We broke through to the asteroid. The nest was not what the others expected. It was not a cave or a hive. It was a structure, massive and ancient, half buried in the rock. Its surface was smooth and dark, covered in swirling patterns that seemed to shift when I looked at them. It was the architecture of the Devourers. I had seen it once before, on the day the First War had ended. I stood up from my chair. Suit up, we are going in. Sir, Vesa said sharply, you should stay on the ship. Let us handle this. I looked at her. No, Lieutenant, I have to be the one. This is my war. I started it. I will finish it. She met my eyes, then she nodded. Then I am coming with you. So am I, Keth said. I looked at them both. My young lieutenant, my old archivist, and I understood finally that some journeys are never walked alone. All right, I said, let's go. We landed the Silver Finch on the asteroid's surface and moved quickly toward the nest. The three of us plus four of the team members went inside. Two remained with the ship. Inside, the corridors were warm and wet and pulsed with a soft, sickening light. The walls seemed to breathe. Every few meters, we had to fight our way past defenders, ZHRL puppets whose bodies were being operated by the Devourer mind. We moved in careful formation, Vesa covering the front, myself in the middle, Keth and the others in the rear. Deeper in, we reached a great chamber. At the center of the chamber was the core, a pulsing mass of dark energy, held in a cage of ancient bones and crystal, rotating slowly in the air. The heart of the Devourers in this region of space. I stopped. A voice filled my mind, not spoken, felt. It was old and cold and tired. You have returned, oath-bound. Yes. 40 years we waited. I know, I hoped you would not come back. We always come back, we are patient, you are brief. I reached into my coat. I pulled out the small device I had carried with me for 40 years, a bomb. The same bomb I had built at the end of the First War when I had believed I had won. I had kept it all these years, knowing that one day I might need it again. Vesa, I said quietly, get the others out now, run. She shook her head, sir. That was an order, Lieutenant. She hesitated, then she looked at Keth. The old archivist nodded at her gently. Child, take the others. I will stay with him. Go. But, go. She turned and ran, pulling the others with her. I watched her vanish down the corridor. Then I turned back to Keth. You should have gone with her, old friend. He smiled. I have waited 40 years to see how this story ends. I will not leave now. I nodded, I armed the bomb. I set the timer for 3 minutes. Then I threw it into the core. Very clever, the voice said in my mind. But I could feel for the first time something new in its tone. Something like surprise, something like fear. You destroy this nest. There are others. Yes, I said, but this one bought us time, and time is all we needed. You will die here. Maybe. Keth and I turned and ran. We ran back through the corridors, past the bodies, past the pulsing walls, toward the surface. We ran faster than 2 old men should have been able to run. Behind us, the core began to glow. We reached the exit. The Silver Finch was waiting, engines hot. Vesa was at the airlock reaching for us. The bomb went off. The asteroid behind us lifted off its foundations and tore itself apart in a great, silent burst of dark fire. The shockwave hit the Silver Finch. The little ship shuddered. But Vesa, brilliant Vesa, had already pushed the throttle forward at the exact second of the explosion, using the shockwave itself to propel us out of the kill zone. The Silver Finch shot forward at incredible speed, leaving the ruins of the nest behind. I sat down in the command chair, breathing hard. Keth collapsed into the seat beside me, laughing softly. "Report," I said. "Explosion confirmed," Vesa said, her voice shaking. "Nest completely destroyed. Sir, look at the scanners." I looked. Across the battle in the Gorian Pass, the ZHRL fleet had suddenly lost all coordination. Ships were drifting. Formations were breaking. The Devourer mine that had been coordinating them was gone. Thraxus's fleet, seizing the moment, swept through the confused enemy and broke their lines in a single crushing sweep. Within 10 minutes, the battle was over. The ZHRL fleet surrendered or fled. We had won. I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. 40 years. It was done. When we returned to the Crimson Dominion, the entire fleet was waiting. Every ship had turned to face our approach. When we docked, the main hangar was filled with soldiers, thousands of them. Thraxus stood at the front, his armor scorched and dented, his face streaked with dust, a great grin on his face. The Empress was there too. She had come aboard during the battle. She stood beside Thraxus, her red eyes shining. I stepped off the silver finch. My plain gray uniform was torn. My hands were shaking. Keth limped behind me, leaning on Vesa. The entire hangar went silent as I walked forward. I reached the Empress. I saluted. "Strategos reporting, Majesty. The enemy nest is destroyed. The Devourers in this region are broken. The Imperium is safe for now." She looked at me. Her eyes filled with tears again. She did not speak. She simply stepped forward, wrapped her long arms around me, and held me tightly. The hangar erupted in a great cheer that shook the walls of the Crimson Dominion. 3 days later, there was a ceremony. The Empress offered me a permanent position within the Imperium, a palace, a title, a lifetime of honor. I declined all of it politely with a smile. "My place is on Earth, Zal," I told her quietly. "I am an old soldier. I have done what was needed. Now I would like to go home." She nodded sadly. "I understand, but teacher, promise me one thing." "Anything." "Promise me you will not vanish again. Promise me you will answer when I call." "I promise." She kissed my forehead, then she stepped back and let me go. Before I left the Crimson Dominion for the last time, I said goodbye to each member of my team. Vesa was the hardest. She stood at attention in her dress uniform, her young face trying not to show any emotion and failing. "Lieutenant Vesa," I said, "you are the finest young officer I have ever served with. The Imperium is lucky to have you. Promise me you will keep learning." "I promise, sir," her voice cracked. "Thank you for everything, for teaching me to see beyond myself." "You did that yourself. I only held up a mirror." She raised her hand in the clumsy human salute I had first taught her. It was perfect now. I returned it, proper and sharp. Thraxus was last. The great general and I stood on the observation deck, looking at the stars one final time. "You were a worthy commander, old friend," I told him. "And you strategos were everything I thought I was but was not," he laughed softly. "You have taught me to be a better general by showing me what real strength looks like. Quiet, patient, kind." I clasped his forearm. He clasped mine. No more words were needed. I boarded a small human shuttle and left the Crimson Dominion for the last time. As the shuttle pulled away, I saw the great red ship shine in the light of a distant star. I saw Vesa standing at the observation window, watching me go. I saw Thraxus saluting from the bridge. I saw the Empress, on her flame of dawn, bowing slightly toward my shuttle as it passed. Then they were gone, and the dark of space carried me home. Earth had not changed much while I had been away. My small house sat at the end of a quiet country road, surrounded by a garden I had planted decades ago. The roses were a bit wild. The vegetable beds needed weeding. The fence had leaned in one corner during a storm. I set down my bag. I took off my plain gray uniform, folded it carefully, and put it in a drawer. I put on an old flannel shirt, a pair of worn trousers, and my gardening boots. I walked outside with a cup of tea in my hand, sat down on my porch, and watched the sun rise over my little patch of land. It was good to be home. The months passed quietly. I tended my garden. I baked bread. I read old books. Some evenings I wrote in my journal, recording what I remembered of the war. Other evenings I simply sat and watched the stars come out. One afternoon, a young man in a military uniform walked up my driveway. He was perhaps 23 years old, with short brown hair and nervous brown eyes. He held a sealed envelope in his hands. When he saw me on the porch, he stopped and seemed to forget what he had come to say. "Sir," he finally managed, "my name is Henry Palmer. I was sent here by General Cole of Earth Command. I was told you would be expecting me." I smiled. Was I? "Yes, sir. They said you would train me." I took a sip of my tea. I looked at this young man, so nervous, so green, so full of hope and fear in equal measure. I saw myself in him, 50 years ago. I saw every young soldier I had ever taught, every student I had ever raised, every lieutenant who had ever looked up at me with that same mixture of awe and uncertainty. I stood up slowly. "Well," I said, "you had better come inside. We will start with tea." He followed me into the house. I poured him a cup and set it in front of him. He held it with both hands, the way young people do when they are not sure what to do with them. "Sir," he said, "may I ask what will you teach me?" I sat down across from him. I thought for a long moment. "I will teach you," I said, "that the loudest soldier in the room is rarely the strongest, that patience is a sharper blade than steel, that kindness to those who mock you is not weakness but the deepest form of power. I will teach you that a uniform without medals is not a lesser uniform, that silence used correctly can win a war. I will teach you to listen, young man, to watch, to wait, and when the time comes, to move without hesitation." He stared at me. His tea sat forgotten in front of him. "Sir," he whispered, "they said you led armies, that you saved empires, that you were the strategos primarch." I smiled my small, patient smile, the same smile the Velksari had once mocked. "Son," I said gently, "I was just a man in a plain gray uniform, nothing more." I sipped my tea. Outside, the wind moved through my garden, and the evening birds began to sing, and somewhere far away, above the blue sky, the stars of 1,000 alien worlds continued their slow and ancient dance. They had mocked the human soldier, until the alien Empress had discovered his true rank, and then they had learned the oldest lesson of the galaxy. The quietest man in the room is the one holding it all together.